The capacity market is designed to secure enough capacity on the system to keep the lights on. So those kind of the lights are going out moment is supposed to ensure that we always have enough capacity for that not to happen. If what's caused the stress event goes on for a day, most storage couldn't deliver. If we instead took storage outside the CM and said, okay, right, we'll have a capacity agreement for storage on a similar basis to the capacity market, but instead of saying, okay, stress event starting in 4 hours, ready, steady, go, and everything starting to discharge, you let the system operator say, okay, well, we'll let you charge over there, and now you, and now you, and now I want you to start discharging. You could get a far better value out of storage for customers, I think. Don't we want all the industry that wants capacity has capacity, and therefore people will compete in generation? You will push down wholesale prices compared to saving a fiver on not having built something. And when you look at constraint costs running at like £10 million a day, we could have a lot of cable in gold for that money, I suspect.
Hello and welcome back to Transmission. This week, Ed Porter is joined by Lisa Waters, founding director at Waters Y Associates. The conversation explores the capacity market, the role storage plays within it, the process of regulation changes in the UK energy industry, and lots more. If you're enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode, and leave us a review wherever you listen. Let's jump in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Transmission. Today we're joined by Lisa Waters. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you.
And to give our listeners some context, could you run through what you do and what do Waters Y do?
So Waters Y is a regulatory and commercial consultancy. We've been around for 22 years, which is a bit scary. And we help companies navigate the regulatory maze. So that might be keeping up to speed with changes on industry codes. It might be helping trade a capacity market unit, market entry, making sure your compliance procedures are up to date in case Ofgem do come around and raid you. So it's pretty broad. We have also once organised a party by accident for a very large energy company. So, yeah, we'd always say to companies, give us a go. If we don't know how to do it, we probably know someone else who does.
I think in the field of accidentally throwing a party, you're in safe company with Modo. This is something that happens quite a lot. You know, you think we're just going to have a regular week, and then all of a sudden there it is, another party. Good. And then in terms of your role within Waters Y, so around for 22 years, you have got a number of roles within industry as well. And so I think that would be maybe really useful context for helping people understand kind of the breadth of what you cover in the space.
Yeah, so Waters Y has got 3 directors. My founding partner, Nick, leads on gas, Gareth leads on retail, and I lead on wholesale power. And as part of that, over the years, you dip in and out of things that you didn't mean to do. So, for example, I was on the steering group that put in place the current electricity trading arrangements. I was a member of the panel of technical experts before for government, and I am again now. I've been attending the BSC panel both as a member and as an alternate for probably the best part of 15 years. And I sat on the imbalance settlement group from go live until last year. So that was over.
So you've seen your fair share of kind of tea and biscuit meetings, but also like being a crucial part of the governance process of how actually the energy system is run within the GB market.
Yeah, and for a really wide variety of clients. So originally when I left university, I worked for the Confederation of British Industry, and their big focus, obviously CBI members are largely energy customers and not producers. And at the time, there were only the big companies around the table, and we were wrestling things like, you built the Thorpe nuclear reprocessing plant. Should we turn it on? Was it still a good idea to reprocess nuclear fuel? So some very, very varied things from some very different angles on behalf of amazingly different clients.
And if you're thinking, what on earth is the BSC? What on earth is the panel of technical experts? We'll come to that in a few moments and make sure we kind of give that sort of a like appropriate airtime. But just at a really high level, so you've been in the market for a number of these changes, and the perhaps we kind of just get a really quick condensed history of what are the big things that have happened that have taken us from early stage, the pool, through to where we are now.
So when we did privatisation of the electricity industry, we basically privatised only two generators, National Power and Powergen. At the time, National Power was also supposed to take on all the nuclear generators, but the city wouldn't wear it. So that all got pulled. And then the distribution companies owned National Grid. So the monopoly sort of remained the same. And then over time, things got broken up. The electricity distributors, who'd also been the suppliers, got separated out. The generators bought the suppliers. Suddenly we actually had a market that had an awful lot more players in it, but still essentially settled, very much command and control from National Grid. At the time, not a very sexy part of the industry. It was considered to be a bit sort of boring what it did. And then the customers complained and said, we hate the pool, we're being overcharged, the generators are manipulating the market, they are persistently rocking up with broken ball bearings and saying not our fault that the price has gone through the roof. And they lobbied government for a proper market where they could go to a company and sign a bilateral agreement and didn't have to buy at the same price that domestic customers were buying effectively in every half hour. So we did NETA. It was originally called RETA, the Review of Electricity Trading Arrangements. Sound a bit familiar?
Sounds very familiar.
Like we're going around in a circle. And then it became New Electricity Trading Arrangements, which was great because one of my clients had actually phoned me up and said, can you please explain to my wife that RETA in my diary is an industry meeting? So, yeah. And then we did the review and we implemented what we now have, which is this very different bilateral market, which is supposed to only have a residual balancer at the center of it. And the parties were supposed to be, looking for places to sell power and trade out. And all these American traders turned up, which was loads of fun. The American traders were loads of fun. But then, of course, everyone went under and everybody fled back to the US with their tails between their legs.
Okay, so we've covered quite a lot of ground there. Just to put some dates on that. So NETA, when was that?
So we started work. It came in 2000, or was it 2001? I think it was due in 2000, but the final bits probably went until 2001.
Okay, and
so 20 years ago.
That's when the market that we know today started to look a little bit like a lot like.
Yeah. So we've had a lot of changes in rules, but the fundamental structure of the market is. The wholesale trading arrangements are the same. Things that have changed have been things like how you support renewables and introducing capacity markets. But the structure of the wholesale market is pretty similar to how it was then.
Maybe to ask a bit of a nuanced question about that. So who has overseen all of those changes? So this sounds like a lot of change to go from the pool to NETA. To what degree is that led by industry, and to what degree is that kind of government mandated?
So to do the Big Bang thing, so to do NETA and to now do REMA, you need government because you need legislation and you need, therefore, sign up from government to spend the time doing it. Once you've put the industry arrangements in place, then the industry has these codes, the codies that you can change, and that is what fine-tunes things. I mean, we had, when we brought in the balancing and settlement code with NETA, I think the first change was on day one. Someone raised a rule change on day one, and then we're up to 5 or 6 mods by the end of the first week when people went, oh, that didn't work. Oh, we'd like a shorter gate closure. Oh, Can we have dual notification of contracts into central systems? So it was very quick that people started saying, well, we can make this better.
What's quite interesting about that is that people look at REMA and think, oh, well, we'll do that, but only if we can kind of get like this perfect system. And I suppose looking back at those changes that we had originally, the perfect system wasn't found. We didn't move to something and then it was kind of static forever. We moved and then we fixed stuff. And maybe that's a nice analogy of maybe where we're going to with REMA, that if we do change, so let's say the market does change, that actually from day one of that, we would be able to kind of guide that market to be in a sensible place.
Yeah, and I mean, it's always a sort of, you want to get to 90-10, don't you? 90% of it is right, and therefore it's basically going to function and basically everything will work. And then you say, okay, well, we could always do things better. And as an industry, we're always going to do things better because it's always changing. When I look back at the privatization and amusingly, the fact that every single company that was sold off by the government in its sales brochure had a bunny rabbit in it. I mean, we were the bunny rabbit industry, apparently.
What's the bunny rabbit?
Yes, I don't know. But I joined the industry and someone said, you've got to read all the prospectuses and then you'll know how the industry works. And I kept saying, they've all got pictures of rabbits in them. Nice fields with rabbits, no pictures of power stations. But, the country was just full of big coal-fired power stations. We hadn't started the dash for gas. That wasn't until about 96. And then and now look at it. We've got batteries and wind farms and all these things. So, and that'll change. Something else will come along.
Yeah. I think, well, we don't see many prospectuses with rabbits in these days. So that definitely has changed.
It was good. When we did NETA, we did meet, the whole industry met in the NEC in Birmingham to talk about, it was very open, very transparent, very inclusive. And one of the members of the industry is deaf. So we had someone doing sign language and everyone kept talking about rabbits. So this poor sign language person kept having to go.
Kept on having to add the bunny ears to the whole piece. I suppose maybe on the subject of like the 90-10, right? So 90% of it's right, 10% of it's wrong. You've seen a lot of this. You've seen the market kind of evolve a long way. What are we doing really well, and what are we getting wrong?
So I think we do really well trying to manage changes that occurs and industry being leaders. And I think we are an industry of really positive people generally. People want things to be better. They want things to change. And that's a really good thing. And it's a really nice industry to work in that way. What I really struggle with is how particularly the regulator gets down a rabbit hole of something that is nice to have, but really not a priority in terms of delivering value for customers, and trying to get them to focus on these are the things we actually really need to do, and have the staff at a senior level committed to rock up and work with the industry, because the industry rocks up at a senior level for change meetings and things. And I don't find that the regulator matches the industry in its achievements.
And maybe to put an example on that, right? So something where we're missing engagement from Ofgem's side in terms of the big changes that we want to put through.
So I think connections reform. So we've had these connections reform changes going on. The industry's been meeting at least 2 to 3 times a week trying to get the work done. Ofgem said they wanted it. Well, why are they not rocking up and leading it? And we've ended up in a place with alternates all over the place. It's 20 alternative changes being raised by the industry. Whereas if the regulator takes a bit more of a lead on some of these things, it may not be what the industry wants, but it will be a lot quicker and a lot more efficient. And yesterday there was a meeting, and then just after the meeting, the regulator puts out a blog saying, well, when we said we wanted that, we now think we want something slightly different. And you've issued that to the industry in a blog. And in that blog, you've said, and our board won't meet this month because it's August. But you're expecting the industry to meet. It's that kind of thing I find very frustrating.
Yeah. And I think others would find that frustrating as well. In terms of connection reform, it's quite clear it's been an issue for a while. We are definitely working on it. But yeah, could we have gone much faster with a more centralized approach? Possibly.
Well, and I think it's been an issue for a lot longer than people think. So I was trying to get a connection agreement for a client in 2009, due to commission in 2014, gas-fired plant, southwest of England, sort of place where you think, actually, we need some conventional generation to provide system stability. And I was stuck behind Hinkley, which at the time was due to commission in 2016.
And so that project was then having to wait
until all the investment for Hinkley was done. And that was never going to be 2016, I mean, realistically. And then likewise, when we worked on Severn Power, that the crossing across the Severn Estuary is very congested. And that was back in 2010, 2011. Yeah. So these are not new issues. This has been building up and building up. And Ofgem seems much more interested in, okay, well, out of the capacity we've got, how do we share it out? Who has capacity at any given time? And that feels to me like deck chairs on the Titanic. Yeah. well, don't we want all the industry that wants capacity has capacity, and therefore people will compete in generation or with DSR as well, hopefully, but you will push down wholesale prices compared to saving a fiver on not having built something. And when you look at constraint costs running at like £10 million a day, we could have a lot of cable in gold for that money, I suspect.
So just to kind of put that another way, effectively, you're saying we could, if there was more direct involvement from, say, Ofgem, then we could have run a more centralized process on connection build out and be a lot further along in comparison to where we are today. What's quite interesting is that almost feels like what things like REMA are trying to suggest, and with NESO becoming like having this kind of mandate for centralized strategic plans. It feels like that's a little bit of what's being put forward.
I think there are two different things. One, you can still have a market where industry puts stuff on the table and the regulator rocks up and says, okay, well, let's try and develop this idea and see if it runs, and then say, well, over here on this one, we just don't think that's a runner, so let's not waste any time on it. So I think there's a difference between being totally centrally planned and the regulator taking a more strategic role and being clear up front about what they will and will not accept. And that used to be how it was, I think, until the regulator started to get taken to court. We haven't had any judicial review, well, not many recently, but we did go through a bit of a spate of them.
And just to kind of explain to people what a judicial review is.
Oh, so the regulator makes a decision, and then one of the companies will take the regulator actually to court to a judicial review to say it was a bad regulation or you're mad. It's basically those are the only two grounds.
And the last one we had was around the capacity market, I think.
Well, that ended up in the European Court. That wasn't a challenge to Ofgem. And one of the famous ones was transmission losses, when we'd spent about 4 years arguing about transmission losses. Eventually got to a modification that Ofgem signed off. I think it was British Energy and a couple of others judicially reviewed them, and it turned out Ofgem hadn't provided the right paperwork to its board, so it lost the judicial review. And so we started the whole thing again. And as everyone will know, we have transmission losses. So they got there in the end, but it was very painful for us all.
Yeah. I think really useful kind of to understand a little bit about how these processes are working and how the kind of governance of all of it slots together. Maybe to talk about a more specific part of the market. So let's talk about the capacity market, because you work a lot with clients on the capacity market. And let's just kind of run through some of the basics. So what is the capacity market?
So the capacity market is designed to secure enough capacity on the system to keep the lights on in a system stress event. A system stress event is defined in the capacity market rules, but basically it's something like you start to get power cuts because you haven't got enough energy on the system. So grids calling voltage reduction from the distribution companies. Those kind of the lights are going out moment is supposed to ensure that we always have enough capacity for that not to happen. So different countries do it in different ways. We decided that we would try and pay companies to stay open. So that was at the time, this was designed in 2012, started in 2014. It was keeping companies like Egbra, keeping its coal-fired power stations, Rugeley, that lot on the bars while we built new plant. And then the way it works is we hold an auction. It's supposed to be this year, but the timetable got slipped several years ago and we've never pulled it back, which is a bit of a nightmare. But we hold an auction for capacity needed for the year ahead. So for running from October each year, and then capacity 4 years out. And if you're an existing plant, you can get a 1-year agreement. Depending on how much you spend, you can either refurb or be new. A refurbishing plant is expected to spend less, and they can get up to a 3-year agreement from the T-4 auction. And a new plant can get up to a 15-year agreement from the T-4 auction. So that's what's behind it. You are paid based on how much derated capacity you've got in the auction that clears, and everything is take it all or take nothing. So it will be your whole capacity market unit or none. There's no sort of halves. And then in return for that money, if there is a stress event, and you must be given 4 hours notice prior to a stress event occurring, if you do not rock up with the energy, then you will be penalised for non-delivery. So We've never had a stress event, so we don't know if it works.
Yes. I was going to ask that question because in some ways, the question is, does it work? And we've never had a stress event. And so you could argue yes.
Yeah, I would argue yes, it's worked because you haven't had a stress event.
But then you could also say the cost of procuring a lot of that capacity have UK consumers had a good deal out of that?
I don't think so. I think they've had an awful deal.
Okay.
Truly awful deal. I mean, it's really expensive. So you paid. You can do it several ways, can't you? You can do what other countries do, which have strategic reserve. So you only buy so many new power stations in a year. You can potentially buy those power stations and hold them out in the market. So the system operator only uses them when they are stressed. There are lots of different ways to do it, but it feels like we have paid quite a lot of money to parties that probably would have been there anyway.
Because it also has a knock-on effect, right? So if you pay the parties to be there, then that gives you more capacity on the system, as it sounds like. But that does reduce an element of kind of scarcity pricing or volatility that you have in the market. And so,
which is probably a good thing because governments hate and regulators hate volatility. They always sort of say they love markets, but if you've got an unexpected war occurring or something, prices have gone through the roof. You've got everyone running around going, well, we can't have the prices like these.
Yeah,
these are the wrong prices, and that's always a problem. What basically civil servants don't tend to really believe in markets. They're a bit half-hearted about it.
Yeah, nobody wants to be in charge when a blackout happens, for sure. So then we've got, does the CM work? I think yes, but it was expensive. Second part of that, does the CM work for battery storage?
So I don't think it works at all for battery storage. I mean, to be fair to the government, it was never designed with battery storage in mind. We knew that we'd have the pump storage stations in, but that's quite a different type of storage. So the problem with storage under the CM rules was because it's duration limited, it therefore gets very heavily derated. And over time, it's becoming more and more derated. It's gone slightly up this year, but basically there's no sort of reliability associated with it. And then it's got to do these extended performance tests where it has to prove it can do its duration. And of course, as batteries degrade over time, those might become increasingly difficult for parties to do. And then in a system stress event, they must deliver for the duration of the event. So if what's caused the stress event goes on for a day or 12 hours, most storage couldn't deliver and they'll end up being penalised. And that just doesn't feel fair when if we instead took storage outside the CM and said, okay, right, we'll have a capacity agreement for storage, and they all signed up on a similar basis to the capacity market. But instead of saying, okay, stress event starting in 4 hours, ready, steady, go, and everything starting to discharge, you let the system operator say, okay, well, we'll let you charge over there, and now you, and now you, and now I want you to start discharging. You could get a far better value out of storage for customers, I think.
It's more of like a reserve.
Coordinated reserve.
Coordinated reserve. Okay.
Coordinated storage capacity reserve.
Okay, there we go.
You have to come up with a good acronym because you like a good acronym.
You have to get the acronym right. That's critical. I suppose the counterpoint to that would be that actually when you get, let's say that stress event happens and you're a battery, you kind of mentioned two things, right? So there's the stress event and there's the kind of the extended performance testing. Extended performance testing is based around the connection capacity, which is slightly unusual, but the performance in a stress event is based around the derated capacity. And so maybe not for a full day's worth of stress event, but let's say a stress event happened for an hour and you're 100 megawatt hours worth of battery, you might be required to deliver 12, let's say you're 12% derated, 12 megawatt hours. So you deliver that. But you could also deliver more in that event. And as a battery site, you probably do want to do that because the price is probably going to be quite high. So you'll probably try and dispatch as much as possible into that event. So you'll have 12 megawatt hours that will be compatible with the system stress event. Let's say that happened for an hour. And then you'd have all this extra energy that you also delivered. And what can you do with that energy?
So anyone who over delivers has got, I think it's 9 or 10 days after a stress event to trade it out. But you would assume anyone who can deliver is over delivering. And that is another, what I think is a sort of fundamental problem with the capacity market. So I've issued a warning 4 hours ahead. So hasn't that just told all the storage assets to charge? So doesn't that push us into a system stress event quicker?
I think they would already be charging. Like I don't see any world where batteries won't see that coming. Like they're already running like 24, 48 hour forecast ahead of time. So I would expect that many of the batteries would already be ready to go. You are right though, there would be some that might be doing something else and might rush to try and charge. But I think that's probably quite a limited portion of the fleet.
But it depends what causes a stress event, doesn't it? So if we have an unseen, interconnector on fire, sudden cold weather on the other side of Europe, gas plant starts to freeze, then you could be actually in a stress event at the point you get the 4 hours notice. So you've effectively got rolling blackouts. You've got 4 hours to get your stuff together before a stress event technically starts under the rules. And you would be telling the batteries to charge. So it does depend if you get a quick event or a slow event and whether or not you can see it. And then also the moment the stress event starts, you've just told everyone to discharge and all generators to effectively do the equivalent of max gen. And suddenly you've got a system that's gone from maybe a little bit short to very long.
Yes. Okay.
So I would really hate to be in the control room. Well, actually, I'd love to be watching the control room.
But when that stress event comes through, the panic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because don't forget, we've got so much generation that the system operator can't see. So I think you could end up in this bizarre position where all the distributed power stations and storage that aren't, I'll just think of storage as power stations, in the balancing mechanism, they're all doing their own thing. The system operator's got no control over them. And so they are taking down, they're accepting offers to come off from every other power station in the country. All the big ones are all being told to close down because the DNOs have gone mad. You don't know how it will play out.
So let's just talk about that for a second, because it's a bit of a niche part of the market, right? So the ESO's control room can see everything that's registered for the balancing mechanism. These other assets that sit outside, why do they sit outside of the balancing mechanism? What are they?
So if you're over 50 megawatts, you are licensed and your license requires you're in the balancing mechanism. If you are transmission connected, you must be in the balancing mechanism. And if you want to be in the balancing mechanism, you can be in the balancing mechanism. But if you're under 50 megawatts, 49.9 is quite a common size for a power station in the UK, then you're connected to distribution systems. You don't have to be in the balancing mechanism if you don't want to. It doesn't mean you may not participate in other wholesale markets like balancing reserve or response markets, those kind of things, but you don't have to be in the balancing mechanism. So grid cannot see you in real time and it cannot instruct you in real time.
Okay. And we're slightly getting ahead of ourselves going into the BM side of this. So let's kind of row back a little bit to the capacity market. We touched on secondary trading, so this kind of concept of delivery in a capacity stress event. We've never done it. That feels like it's going to be chaos the first time it happens.
Oh, totally.
Okay,
but that's okay. We're sort of industry works out. Somebody back in 2014, I think it was RWE, did produce a draft because we tried to we asked government to come up with a draft contract so we'd have something ready up our sleeves. And I assume somebody's got a copy of that email somewhere.
Well, the good news is the whole industry is based around someone searching through their drafts from 2014 for a secondary trading contract when it happens. What could go wrong?
What could go wrong?
Yeah, what could go wrong? Good.
Well, and then you've got to register all the volume reallocations into grid systems, and the delivery body doesn't have the best systems. So, who knows if the IT wouldn't just fall over.
And then how does all this get agreed in terms of price as well? It feels like another, is it all just bilaterally traded, or would there be kind of almost an exchange? Well, I don't think there's going to be an exchange. So
a lot of parties will be having the same penalty, but there will be a handful of parties. So if you're on a 15-year agreement and you're 5 years in, or a 15-year agreement you're 4 years in, then you've got different prices to the people who are just on a T-1. So I don't know how the industry will work that out, but
yeah, it's going to be interesting if it happens. If it happens, it might not.
Let's hope not, because the whole point of the capacity market is to keep the lights on.
Absolutely.
not to have them go out.
Absolutely. And so the other part of this in terms of batteries coming into the capacity market, many battery projects will come in, will pick up a capacity market contract, and then something will go wrong. So they will go to National Grid and they will have a conversation potentially about a transformer somewhere, and we'll find out that actually that's never going to happen, or it's going to be delayed by 5 years, and they're going to totally miss their CM dates. A whole host of other reasons as to why this might happen. How do parties change or cancel their capacity market contracts?
So the most important thing to know is you're not allowed to terminate your own agreement. So once got an agreement, you're on the hook for it. So there are a number of things you can do. There is a chapter of the rules that says it's about trading, but it doesn't really work. And I can't tell you how many rule changes I've raised and said, please, can we help make trading work? So in theory, you can trade an agreement, but you can only trade it after you have reached your substantial completion milestone, which is basically you built a power station. And if you built a power station, why would you want to trade it?
Yeah,
that sort of misses the point. So there is something in there called a location change. And then what you can do is if you can find someone to buy your project who's got pretty much the same technology, same planning and everything else, then you location change your capacity market agreement to their site. And then they hand you back all the things that you had at your sites, because you have to make these trades absolutely match, and they can take on your agreement. So it is very difficult. Do not go into capacity market thinking, oh, well, if I get a really expensive price for my battery technology, I won't bother building. It'll be fine. I'll just hand back my agreement. You cannot hand back your agreement.
So what happens? Because yes, you could either find someone else to take it. It could get cancelled, not by yourself, but by other events that are happening on that particular project. What happens if time runs out and the thing isn't built?
So you do get so if you've got a long-term contract from the T-4, you do get an extra year. You've got a long stop date that is a year after your original delivery year. So that's one option. You could do minimum completion rather than substantial completion, which is you build 50% of the capacity and then you wouldn't get terminated. Substantial completion is you got done 90%. And then your agreement gets scaled back. So you've got less of an agreement. If you're late because your network connection hasn't rocked up, actually that just rolls forward. And again, I've raised a rule change. No one's doing my rule changes that says if your connection was going to move by 2 years, for example, you are allowed to get out of your agreement, because it's not fair. These companies are missing out on both energy income and capacity market income. And that doesn't seem very reasonable. The point of 15-year agreements was because the government thought you needed 15 years to bring forward new technologies and new plant. So if you only end up with 12 or 13 years, then people not unreasonably don't want to build. But at the moment, no one's taking my rule change.
No one's taking the rule change. Okay.
Very sad.
I'm almost nervous to ask this next part, but how often do people get this wrong?
Quite a lot.
Okay.
So I think there are some key mistakes that people make. Is they don't understand the difference between the extended performance tests and their obligations in a stress event. So I think that's an issue. I don't think people understand that once they've got an agreement, they can't just get out of it. I think they can just terminate it. It's not like any other industry contract where you normally can terminate for one reason or another. And I think people, particularly the people who took contracts at very low prices, thought there was sort of nothing to it. It was money for doing nothing. Well, it's not. You do have to do satisfactory performance tests, everyone, but batteries, they do extended performance as well. And you do have to deal with the delivery body, and that's not a zero cost activity.
Yeah.
And invariably, we get people coming to us saying, well, I don't understand what this is and that is. And then you're ending up paying for very good value consultancy fees.
Yeah.
But it's not as simple as people think, and that's a mistake.
Okay. So let's move on from the CM to the BSC. So you're a member of the BSC panel. What is that? What do you do?
So the Balancing and Settlement Code is the rules, the contract, just contract that covers all energy settlement, energy flows and energy settlements, as opposed to the other codes in the industry. So the Connection Use System Code covers how the transmission system works and is charged for. The distribution connection use system code covers how the distribution companies connections network charges work. But the key energy document is the BSC. So once you want to trade energy, you will sign the BSC if you're a physical party that's licensed, so suppliers and generators. If you want to be in the balancing mechanism, so you could be 10 megawatt embedded storage and you want to be a balancing mechanism unit, then you would sign up to the BSC. Well, normally you could get a supplier to do it, but most people do it. Or you're a trader. So non-physical traders who just trade energy but want to take energy through to the day, they sign up to the balancing and settlement codes. So those are the parties that are signatories to it, and it tells them how their energy flows are going to be settled.
And that sounds easy to say. When someone comes to you and says, okay, I want to sign up to the BSC, I want to become a balancing mechanism unit because I think I can get better returns from that. What does that process look like?
A lot of form filling.
Lots of forms.
Lots of forms. So the issue with it at the moment is, so smaller assets, particularly storage, need to be aware that if you are a non-balancing mechanism unit and you become balancing mechanism unit, you are not supposed to be able to backtrack from that. So once you're in, you're in. I personally think REMA is going to make more generators be BMUs anyway, so you might just be getting ahead of the curve. So,
and that comes back to something you were saying earlier, which is for the non-BMUs, it's hard for National Grid's control room to see what they're doing. And so you could see why, e.g. around a system stress event, you would want to have more information flowing into the control room so that they could better understand what assets were going to discharge, etc.
Yeah, and I think the rest of the market needs to see as well. We're looking at how do we get distributed energy resources? What does the underlying demand look like? And what we see at the moment from National Grids is transmission demand. Well, that's not real demand, is it? We need to see what the changing shape is as more people get EVs and heat pumps. As an industry, what do we need to do to respond? And I don't know how we do that if we can't see demand, and we can only see demand if we start stripping out the generation. So there's lots of reasons to say we should just be way more transparent about what's going on in these distributed networks.
And so just to make sure that's really clear for people, that there's the underlying demand, which is, as it sounds, demand, people consuming electricity. Then you have effectively, so let's say that number is 50 gigawatts of demand. Before that reaches the control room, there is generation that gets kind of mixed in with it. And so effectively negative demand. And so we always see this kind of residual demand coming through rather than actual demand.
Yeah, so the data you see on National Grid's website is what they term as transmission demand. So every wind farm, battery, domestic solar panel that could well be generating in the distribution system has been effectively reducing the demand that then gets accepted by the transmission system. So we're not seeing demand in the distribution network unless it happens to be dark and not windy. And even then, there's going to be some batteries running.
Well, it's batteries, but also dark and not windy. I imagine you've also got a number of recips that are running as well. Smaller
coal bed methane, and there will be some hydro that's sitting in various parts of the country. So there's lots of things mixed up in what you see coming onto the transmission system, and that means we don't understand demand.
Can we talk about that for a second? Because whenever Grid talk about carbon intensity, they're talking about the carbon intensity of the stuff they can see. What's going to be really hard when we think about kind of clean power 2030, someone has got a recip, a small 5 megawatt recip on their site. Let's say, I don't know, it's a water utility, and that is running for a particular network charge that's quite nice and kind of pays them out a certain amount of money. But that is, it's like totally off the radar.
Yes, yeah. So Grid does make estimates of what embedded solar and wind is doing, and they do present that to the industry. But yes, so for example, every hospital has backup generation. That is invariably something that's oil or gas fired. They all run them every week to test them, and when they run, nobody will ever see them.
So there's this huge kind of challenge around the clean power 2030. We need to kind of find a way of better describing what these systems are doing. And then as part of that, we can better talk about what the actual carbon intensity of the grid is.
And we also assume that imported electricity is zero carbon because the carbon's been accounted for the other side of the interconnector. And that might be true if you're getting it from Norway.
France. Yeah.
Maybe a lot of France, assuming their nukes are working, but other countries, not so much.
Not so much. Okay, so then maybe making this real for a battery owner. So they come through, they've got a 49.9 megawatt battery project, and they decide that actually they do want to be a BM. They've seen some really good activations in the balancing mechanism, and they think, okay, that's it. I want to do that. How long does it take to get that done? Is it just signing forms in terms of cost, or is there kind of more to it than that?
So it depends on how they want to do it. So the biggest issue for people is getting into grid systems, because for grid, every time you are adding BMUs into their system, you're adding new bits of kit into a live environment that they're actually using for balancing as they're doing it. So they do those in batches or about every couple of months. And getting into that queue can take some time. And then the paperwork you have to do, that's pretty easy if you just focus on it a bit. And then whose systems are you using? Because you do need the computer systems that talk to and from Alexon's systems that tell you what, you're notifying where you've sold electricity to, your meter reads are going in and out, you're receiving notifications from the system operator about turn up, turn down, you're sending in and out dynamic data, and how either you buy those systems and you need to make them work for you, or you get someone to let you use their system. So quite often we see people like aggregators or optimizers who say, well, we will do all of that for you, and you therefore are using their IT. But if you decide to buy it or build it, that tends to slow people down. We try and encourage people to leave about 5 or 6 months because things go wrong.
Yeah.
Because stuff happens.
Okay, 5 or 6 months to go in. And then, as you say, once you're a BM, you shouldn't technically leave the BM.
No.
It is a one-way street. Okay, you heard it here. It's a one-way street. No leaving once you're in. Okay, so let's then just go on to talk a little bit more about batteries specifically. So one thing we're going to talk a lot about is the DESNZ technical experts. So being part of the technical experts panel and looking at the kind of the future of the market, and then just wanting to talk in particular about certain tech. So obviously batteries is very much a battery podcast, so we'll start there. We have 4 gigs, 5.5 gigawatt hours. Potentially we have something between 20 and 30 gigs by 2030-ish. We'll see. And then when we look at the connection queue, that number could be anything but 200 to 400 to give it a bit of.
Currently it's 720, I think. 720 gigs.
But for just batteries?
Oh no, but that's just TO connection.
Yes.
So the DNAs will have a whole load more.
We'll have some extra as well. Okay.
There's lots.
So there's lots. So yeah, the real point there is there's lots of batteries that are potentially trying to connect. How do you see the future of batteries in the GB power market?
So I think that the issue is grid, the government, the regulator, and then with support from people like the panel of technical experts, we haven't yet understood how they are going to fit into the market and where they will ultimately give the best value for customers. I suspect that's not just, one size fits all. There'll be different things that different people can do in different ways. But definitely when you look at should they be in the capacity market? Do we need something that better enables dispatch of storage across a number of time periods, better coordination in periods when the system is stressed? Can we get the balancing systems? Can grid get the balancing systems where they understand their state of charge, discharge, those kind of dynamic data issues that I think not unreasonably grid have been struggling with? Then there's the ancillary services and whether or not parties are offering things in that they then can't deliver, or those ancillary services aren't quite the right design to get the best out of the storage because grid's just not used to dealing with storage. So I think there's a real role for storage, particularly in a highly renewable intermittent world. You can clearly see it should fit and should be good. I think it's the issue when do we work out what and how.
Okay.
And then when you look at the role of the panel of the technical experts is to question grid about its modelling it does for the capacity market. And it does a different report from its future energy scenarios reports and all those kind of things, just for the capacity market. And some of the issues that has to consider is, well, is storage the only asset that is duration limited? So I'd say some DSR is probably duration limited. Could we really ask people to come off for days if we had a day stress? That seems a bit unlikely. And then all these changes associated with capacity, what we're seeing, what I see a lot of in my job is people coming to me and saying, well, I've got a solar farm and a battery. So those two are sharing a connection agreement and we can optimize around that. Well, that's who's got the capacity in a stress event. Are you going to say that you will leave the solar running because it's sunny? Well, no, you won't, because that hasn't got a capacity market agreement. You'll make the battery run. So understanding what's connected and what can get into the system in a stress event. I think people have got this very weird view that we should expect a stress event on the coldest day of the year. And I think on the coldest day of the year is normally when power stations are actually ready and up and running.
Yeah, they're driven by price.
Yes.
So they're there, ready to go. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the issue that we're trying to plan for, and how does storage fit into that? What would it be likely to be doing in a black swan event?
I think there's on the kind of quick reserve, slow reserve, balancing reserve, response products. I definitely would buy into that we're still almost experimenting with what structure of that works best and how does storage fit into it.
Yeah.
I do think there's an element of, I think in some of our modeling, we get to like 10 to 14 gigs of those types of services, but we just see storage kind of going far beyond that. And so there's kind of, how does ESO get best value from those response and reserve products? But then there's also just this big block of storage that's going to come in and do a big chunk of the intraday balancing. And I think that's going to be a pretty fundamental part of the market. Maybe as gas retires, it will be interesting when do you see, as part of going to kind of a clean power system, when do you see kind of first gas projects coming off the bars?
Oh, that's a tricky one. And I left my crystal ball at home.
Yes.
I can't see it coming off the bars for quite a long time.
Okay.
I just don't think we will be confident with the security of supply. And they may be small power stations that get left, but I think, their ability to deliver system security will be valued for quite a while. What you might see is conversions to hydrogen or co-firing rather than full on.
Yeah.
New build hydrogen plants. So that seems a bit more likely. I mean, I remember when we first did biomass, standing there in a coal-fired power station and watching these olive pips being shoved through this coal station, which oddly didn't work very well because it used to be sticky and coal wasn't quite so sticky. So you used to have a guy with a stick trying to get it through the grinders. So
essential part of any process. The guy with the stick to make it happen.
Make it happen. So I sort of feel that it's optimistic. You might only be running gas a few days in the year.
Yeah.
But I suspect you will still be using it for quite a long time.
I think there's a little bit of that's in the market in terms of this concept of the capacity is there, the connections are there, the gas grid is there. If you run them for 1 or 2 days at a time, from a carbon emissions perspective, how bad is that versus the cost of, say, converting the whole thing to, say, hydrogen to power, which when you run that process, you build an entire gas-fired power station for hydrogen to power to run 1 or 2 times a year. Like, the mind boggles as to kind of just how much that's going to cost.
Yeah.
And feels like, I don't know, I'm not sure we're going to see hydrogen to power in that way, unless there's a lot of money thrown at it through some form of reserve type product.
Well, and also the other thing you do see is the government's and the Environment Agency are quite keen on saying, well, less and less emissions per power station. And then you run into this odd thing where you've got hundreds of power stations, but because they're all allowed to run for 5 hours each, rather than just saying, okay, well, let's have 5 or 6 strategic ones towards the end of the system, and we accept that they do run more. So you sort of have to be quite careful, I think, about balancing what is the real environmental outcome compared to it all looks good, but we've spent so much money to get here that customers have really not got a good deal out of this.
Yes, I think that's the big balancing act. And I suppose the other part of this that we haven't talked about, CCS/CCUS. You will have seen CCUS coming through early 2000s being talked about. If it was an easy thing to do, we would have probably got it done then. What's the kind of expectation in terms of the deliverability of CCS/CCUS?
Well, it does feel like it's been an awful long project, but while companies are still working on it and government's still supporting it, you assume sooner or later someone will crack it, and it will work. Probably not that well the first time, but as with all things, they get better. You think of how small the original onshore wind farms were. I remember going to visit one in Cornwall and going, God, they're so big.
Yeah.
Big windmills, but look at them now. Those are tiny little things that produced hardly any power compared to the enormous wind farms we were putting in offshore. These things will always come along in fits and starts. Yeah. So I think it feels 2035-ish rather than
2035-ish. Okay. Alrighty. I think there's kind of it's a really interesting piece. We've seen sort of CCUS look like it would be delivered many times.
Yeah, many.
And not kind of getting over that hurdle. And the suspicion is from the outside that there's a reason why these kind of projects aren't going ahead, whether it's cost, some sort of network around the carbon piece, whether it's around the actual efficiency of the whole process, or maybe the combination of all of that stacking up to something that just means that somebody's not willing to go ahead and do it. So yeah, super interesting. Okay. So I wanted to ask 2 questions just to finish up. So one, is there anything that you would like to plug?
Yeah, I can think of one thing I would like to plug is the government is very keen, and economists by and large are quite keen, that in a market with pay as clear and in a market with pay as bid, you end up with the same cost to consumers. And I just don't buy it. I think it should be pay as bid and not pay as clear.
With regards to?
Anything.
All auction processes should be?
The BM, even if you have central dispatch.
Okay. Should all be?
Reserve markets. It doesn't really matter what it is. Unless they are incredibly competitive markets with everyone having the same knowledge and same transparency and all of those things that economic theory says you need for an efficient market, which just absolutely don't exist in the real world. Then, yeah.
Okay. And then final question, what is your contrarian view? So what is something that you believe that the rest of the market might not?
That DSR will never really happen. I don't think the majority of the population are very interested. And I think the removal of the triads, which you did get a lot of response from industry over the years, has just made DSR not economic and not very interesting. And why would I want to participate in this? I mean, there's always going to be some, but it seems to me as an industry, for my entire career, we've spent loads of time when we were doing NETA, we talked about having a separate pool for demand. We were going to have an A pool and a B pool, and B was for the demand, with the customers going, but actually we want to make steel, not make steel and get paid.
Yes. I suppose the kind of counter to that would be, we're now getting to a world where we've got this kind of information in all of the kind of parts of our home. We have it in our EVs, we have it in our heat pumps. Every single part of our home or the work that we do is kind of connected to the grid. And I think people aren't interested in turning off. Some people are interested in turning off their lights and sitting in the dark, but not everyone. But if it was done in a way that you didn't notice it, then I think there's an element where that might come through. So for example, charging your EV, if that was done in an automated way overnight, then there's some shifting of demand, maybe not full demand side response, but some shifting of demand.
So I've got an EV.
Yeah.
So when I get home, I charge it so that it's ready for me to use next time I need it. And that might be because some idiot child has fallen out of a tree and I need a quick trip to A&E. and getting there in a cab is going to be 30 quid. And if my car doesn't have enough power to get there, that's going to be my option.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to get paid 30 quid to have my car uncharged. It's the money isn't worth it.
So when you get home, you want that to be charged immediately because of the potential downside of it. Yeah.
The optionality of a car is, because otherwise I could just take Ubers everywhere, which would probably actually be the more economic thing to do if you live in London like I do. And then there's if you've got the Internet of Things and you can set up that your house will do all this smart stuff, and then you come home to find it's all gone wrong, you're never going to or trust your energy supplier again, or whoever has set this up. So I just don't think the money you get paid, we've all, well, probably not everybody, but been on holiday, come back to find your fridge is broken, or there was an outage and everything in your freezer is now, that's a lot of money. And then to say to your supplier, well, yes, of course you can interrupt my freezer overnight for 15 minutes. I know it doesn't make any difference, but I'd just be worried it wouldn't come back on, because I don't particularly trust my energy supplier. And I think that would be the same for the vast majority of the population, sadly, does not trust their energy suppliers.
Yeah, there's going to be a real kind of lethargy in take up and delivery of it, and it might continue to under deliver versus expectation. Okay, super interesting, and a genuinely contrarian view, actually.
I know, everyone's obsessed by DSR.
Everyone loves DSR.
But they have been since the 1990s. It's not different.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Well, Lisa, thank you very much for taking us through all things CM, BSC, CUSC, the various rule books that kind of guide how all of this sticks together. Much appreciated. And yeah.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Transmission, a Modo Energy podcast. Transmission delivers conversations from industry leaders and experts exploring energy markets and the operations and technologies related to grid-scale battery energy storage. Check out our other episodes by searching Transmission wherever you get your podcasts. Check out the Energy Academy, our video crash course on how markets in Great Britain and ERCOT work, or head to modoenergy.com to see our written research. Thanks for listening.